Hey guys, it's Casey and welcome back to my channel. I don't know if welcome is necessarily the correct word for it tonight, but here you are on my video. A lot of stuff has gone down that I'm not going to get into, but it doesn't mean that I don't have specific things that I want to discuss and rant about. Specifically, I'm just tired of everything to do with how your societies function, or really a deep dive into how your societies are dysfunctional is probably a more accurate way to word it. Because everything that you do, everything that you are, everything that I have observed over the last 11-ish years is dysfunctional, from the housing to the employment market, healthcare, education, even everything that you buy over consumption is erratic and nonsensical. And it doesn't matter where in the world it is, whether you're in the United States of America or you're in Japan or you're in India, everywhere functions exactly the same. And that's because despite what you all might like to think, in order to give yourself credit, social credit, there is just a monolithic culture that all of you are part of, and that monolithic culture is terrible. And today, I want to take a trip down memory lane, even though that's more or less all I ever do on this channel at the moment, is just take trips down memory lane. But this time, it's less personal about what I've experienced, and it's about what you've experienced and how terrible it is compared to where I grew up, because everything here is functionally illiterate and terrible, and you should be ashamed. Because every single person that I have met here in the modern West is functionally annoying. Every single one, with almost no exception. You're all terrible. You're all terrible, and it's because you grow up in terrible societies that don't prepare you for anything, and so you just move through the world laughing at every opportunity, and it's just really, it's not pleasant to encounter. And so I am just going to talk about everything society from all levels of the world and how it can be better, and just see where I get tired of talking and end up. So where's a good place to start? Because it's all interconnected. When society is functioning properly, everything should be connected to one another, which is not how it currently is in your societies, because again, your societies are not fit for purpose. And I am being extraordinarily charitable by making this video and pointing out all your worldly flaws, of which there are many, and too many to name in a singular video, but we're going to see how far we get. Whenever I film these videos outlining the culture that I grew up in, I always default, for the sake of ease, to saying that I grew up under a socialist system. But that's just because you're all annoying and uneducated, and your political science knowledge across the entire globe is still in its infancy and underdeveloped, much like your actual science understanding, which is appalling. The fact that you do not have quantum gravity yet, the easiest equation known to mankind, it is also indicative of the education that you receive, which is a lot of debt and not a lot of substance. But we will get to that eventually, maybe today, or maybe not today. Maybe this will be a series, who knows. But the point that I was supposed to be making right then is that, for the sake of your ease, I default to saying that I grew up in a socialist system, which is not true, but I have to say it's true because you still look at these kind of things on a straight binary. You have black, you have white, you have red, you have blue, you have right, you have wrong, and nothing in between. But it's not just capitalism and then socialism/communism with nothing else in between. These things are very nuanced in a way that your brains are not wired to understand yet. Technically speaking, if we were to put it on paper, or alas, on video, the system that I grew up under is a statist, technocratic, communalist federation, which is a hybrid system designed to encourage and promote maximum stability, security, and administrative efficiency, something that your systems all solely that. It replaces the inherent chaos and precarity of a democratic market-driven system with rigid, expert-driven control. It is a political system characterized by competence at the top of the food chain and local democratic systems only at the bottom, where they were always intended to be. Because despite all the never-ceasing whining in your societies about, ooh, capitalism bad, capitalism this, capitalism that, capitalism is not your problem. Capitalism functions exceedingly well when it is given the correct tools in which to function and blossom, something that your societies do not currently do because you are too busy pushing and promoting wide-scale representative democracy, and that is your problem. But you're not ready to have that conversation right now, and Google really, really wouldn't like it. And so we're just going to leave that on the table to fester for another day. See, unlike widespread representative democracy, in which by design the people in power are never actually going to fix anything, because in order to fix something they would be putting themselves out of a job, and that therefore also putting themselves out of power. And so all they're ever going to do is just fix things a teeny tiny stick-sized amount so that it is observable to the electorate, and they can point it and say, hey, I fixed this thing. Aren't I great? I'm so much better than the opposition. Look at me go. I'm making decisions. But they only ever want to fix it that teeny tiny amount. So that way when the opposition inevitably gets into power, the whole entire project, everything that they worked on falls apart. And then they can turn around and point at it again and say, hey, look how much worse this got under the opposition. You should vote me back into power so that I can fix it, without ever actually addressing the underlying problem of what was causing it in the first place. Because in order to do that, it would cost a lot of money. It wouldn't be popular. And I would again lose my job and lose my power. And so we're just going to go in this never-ending cycle of me just fixing things, patching things up with a band-aid so that it looks better while I'm in power, but then looks worse when they're in power. And that is just the tip of the iceberg of the problem of widespread representative democracy. But like I said, this is not the video for it, largely because if I ever filmed a video for it, it would probably never get off the ground and it would just be suppressed like my last video on slavery was, but what can you do about it? Google does what Google does. Anyway, the system that I grew up under, so it was a tiered system. Everything in my society was tiered, and that is how society functions the best, I think. But the way that government was tiered specifically is that at local level, tier 1, you did have local democracies. You had ordinary citizens voting for things like their local commons council and their mayor and their conveyances, which is exactly how democracy is supposed to function. It is supposed to be people for the people. It's supposed to be being represented by somebody who lives in that community, who understands how that community functions on a day-to-day level, and they are directly accountable to their community members, which is not like democracy is at the moment in the modern West and the rest of the world. I know that I say the modern West is just like, I have my reasons for doing that. But when I say that, I'm talking about everywhere. I'm talking about China. I'm talking about India. I'm talking about Japan. I'm talking about Kenya and everywhere in between. It is a catch-all. I'm not just talking about London or New York or Sydney or anywhere like that. It is literally everywhere in 2026 and the way that you function, because it goes back to the fact that you are all one monolithic cultures with just little teeny tiny differences here and there, like eye color or hair color. It doesn't change the fact that you are all one and the same. And even when you're not currently all one and the same, the ultimate goal is to make you all one and the same. The ultimate goal is to have everybody in the world be eating the same things and watching the same things and eventually talking the same language. And if that disturbs you in any way, then you might be happy to know that the world gets a lot smaller in about 65 years' time. So you just need to wait it out. Wait it out. In your lifetime, things are going to change drastically, and they're never going to go back to the way that it was. Thank God. But anyway, like I was saying before I once again got distracted, where I grew up, we had a tiered hybrid governmental structure. And at a local level, that was democratic in the exact same way that you were used to democracy. So people voted for their representatives that lived in the community, and through that they had a say in things like public transport routes and schedules and markets and community spaces and cultural life. Then above the democratic layer, you had tier 2, which was made up of the provincial technocracy. Just to unpack this a little bit, because I don't think that most people in the modern West have ever encountered a technocratic system before, or at least not knowledgeably encountered one, and if they have, it's almost certainly oligarchy. But the system that I grew up under, the technocratic system that I lived under, rather, when I was an adult, because I didn't really understand the one that I was a child on account of me being a child and not particularly interested in governance. The way that it functioned, it was not an oligarchy. It was split up into 8 sovereign provinces that what they called their technocratic leader, how they elected their technocratic leader, changed from place to place, from culture to culture, from word to word. It was never the same, and that is the beauty of a technocratic system, is that it can adjust to the people that it intends to serve. Each province had a technocratic leader. They had one, and only ever one, and how they were elected, who they were, where they came from, why they got the job that they got, what you call them, that changed from place to place, culture to culture, people to people. But what remained consistent across the board, across the map, from province to province, is the fact that they were never democratically elected, which means that the people did not select them. How it worked instead is that they were confirmed by the democratically elected representatives from each region. And once they were elected, they typically held the position for the rest of their lives, unless they themselves chose to step back from it, or they were impeached by a supermajority of the democratically elected regional representatives, which was very, very extraordinarily rare. It did not happen a lot. In fact, it never happened once in my entire lifetime, which should tell you something. The main purpose of a technocratic leader was, to put it very bluntly, get shit done. And that's exactly what they did, because unlike a democratically elected leader, their main focus in everything was not kissing the electorate's ass in order to keep their job and their power, because that was just inherent. Once they were confirmed, they were it. That's all you're getting into. They decide otherwise, or everyone comes together and pretty much chases them out with pitchforks and torches. Because that's the beauty of the technocratic leader, is that they can afford to sit there and look at the floodplains and see, well, this town gets flooded every other month, so we should really do something about that before they turn into an ocean-sized bog with houses built on top. But the town itself doesn't quite like it, because it's going to take 50 years to build the required dam and cost them half their annual budget every year. Well, honestly, that's just too damn bad, because the technocratic leader can afford to look at the long-term picture about where society needs to be moving, as opposed to what is fun and comfortable and enjoyable in the moment for the current electorate. They have a long-term picture, which is what democratic leaders at the moment lack, because they're too busy safeguarding their own job and financial position. The secondary purpose of the technocratic leader is to sit on the federal core. This is the top-level executive brain of the entire state, the topmost authority. Where I come from, well, not where I come from, but where I lived as an adult, and the system that I'm using as an example, the federal core was made up of the 8 technocratic leaders from each province, which included the monarch, who in of themselves was a federal leader of the capital province. However, in saying that, the monarch on the board didn't really have that much power than anyone else did. The only power that they had that any other technocratic leader didn't have is that when there was a gridlock, like a 4-4 vote, then their lock became the tiebreaker. And the only reason that they were even really the monarch is that they were the head figure of state. So if there was an international event going on, they were the ones who went to represent the country. That's it. That is how things work. This very small group, which was made up of the technocratic leaders as well as 3 advisors that they were able to bring with them to each meeting, they would get together and they would make strategic decisions for the nation. So they would do things like currency and international relations and defense and education. And through this system, they were never able to sit in gridlock for a very long time on account of the monarch having the tie-breaking vote. And so once they got together, things moved exceptionally quickly. They could cycle through 12, 13, 14, 15 decisions that would take a democratic nation months to settle on within an afternoon. It was just such a much more efficient system. It really was. Which then leads us directly into the economy. And for comparison, your economy sucks. All of them. Every single one that I've ever seen here in the modern West sucks. You don't know what you're doing. It's not efficient. It's not effective. It just sucks. So our economy, again, was a hybrid. It was half planned economy and half open market. The planned economy proportion of it was things that were essentials. So things like housing and healthcare and medicine and some foods and goods, which I will get into in a minute. Those were all planned. The price of everything to do with that was controlled entirely by the government. Essential foods were part of the planned economy, and what that means is that if you had produce like an apple, apples were priced on a tier level. So everybody was supposed to be earning enough, whether you were a doctor or whether you were a janitor, you were supposed to be earning enough to earn a set amount of C-tiered produce or food products every single week in order to keep yourself healthy. So you had A-tiered apples, you had B-tiered apples, C-tiered apples, D-tiered apples, and E-tiered apples. Now, everybody was supposed to be able to afford, at the base salary that they received, a C-tiered apple. However, you may decide that you want to splurge a little bit and get an A-tiered apple because you're making the greatest apple pie that's ever been known to mankind. Or you may decide that you're only buying apples in order to feed your horses or your pigs, and so E-tiered apples might be a better option for that, in which case you would then have extra credits in order to buy maybe a B-tiered banana for yourself. However, luxury produce, take a dragon fruit for example, was not part of the tiered economy, it was part of the open market. And so, whatever you paid for a dragon fruit was driven by supply and demand. And the same tiered concept applied to housing. So say that you are a 4th-year banker apprentice and you finally have enough to move out of the apprentice household that you were living in prior and move into your own personal flat. Your salary might be a C-tiered salary. So what you would do is that you would fill in a little application form and you would send it off to the technocratic leader's office. That's the first step that you would take. So you are a 4th-year apprentice banker and you want to move to the Arindian province, for example. You're going to fill in your little application form and send it off to the office of the Arindian technocratic leader, and they will review everything that comes in the package. So they're going to review your application, they're going to review your rental history, they're going to review your education transcript, your social standing. And from that, they're going to decide, yes, we will accept you into our province, or no, you won't. You need to go somewhere else. You don't have the requirements to live in our province at the moment. You can apply again in 2 years' time. So if they say yes, you're going to get a little slip back that has the conditions on where you can and cannot live as a 4th-year apprentice banker. So if there's no banks in this region over here, they're not going to allow you to live in that region, but you can live in this region where there are jobs. And you earn a C-tiered salary, and so you're allowed to rent up to a C-tiered property for the leasehold period of 5 years, if this is your first property. Because there is no private ownership of property, everything is owned by the state, by the monarch. The monarch owns everything in the entire country, and everything is held on a leasehold. However, in saying that, one of the greatest generators of generational wealth is through extraordinarily long leasehold periods. For example, if your family is held in extraordinarily high esteem, or you are a generational farmer, then your family might have a leasehold of up to 1,000 years, in which case you have a lot of privilege that a lot of other people don't have. You still can't act in an antisocial way, because antisocial behavior is still the number one enemy of a socialist state, because it just makes things out of control. So the other thing that comes into play if you are antisocial in your behavior, you're going to get a few warnings first. And then if you are still acting in an antisocial behavioral way, you're going to get expelled from the province. And if you get expelled from 2 provinces within a 5-year period, you go to what is called a reform house. And a reform house is like the love child between a Victorian workhouse and a gulag, except for it's supposed to be about rehabilitation. And you will stay in that reform house considering it depends on how many times you've been sent to a reform house. After a few periods, you get you get released after you work off your period and do your rehabilitation. But after a while, if you've been sent to it more than I think it's more than 5 times, you get sent to a different kind of, I don't even remember what it's called, but everyone who can't live independently within a community gets sent there, and it's like an open-air prison with everyone having their own little flats, and you can leave. Well, you can work up your credit in order to be able to leave for like day trips and work out in the community and things like that, but it's just not a good place to be. Anyway, I don't think I said you get approved, you can live in these specific areas in this style of property, this tier of property on this long of a leasehold. They will send you back a little slip, you take it to a real estate agent, and the real estate agent will help you find an appropriate property that suits those conditions. That is how you get a house. The other thing that comes into play that would set your minds on fire is that if you apply to move to a different province, your province that you're moving from can put a stay on you moving if they need to fill the labor gap that you're leaving behind. So say you're a teacher and you want to move again from the Iranian province to the Swannanoan province. The Iranian province can say, yes, she can move, however, she cannot move until we fill in this labor gap. And so we're putting a stay on it for up to 6 months, and they can do that twice, and then they have to let you go. But yeah, you can't just move whenever you want. You need to apply to move. Well, even if there is no stay on your job, you still need to apply to move. The only way that you can live in a province without having a license to do so is that you can live for a very short period of time within a boarding house, a licensed boarding house in which you rent a room. And that's largely just intended to be for like students and people who are in the country for a short amount of time and construction workers and things like that. So that's not even a long-term thing. And then just the reform houses as well. So if the Swannanoan province sends 400 people to a reform house that year, they are legally obligated to take 400 people back into their province who have finished their stay in the reform house. And at that point, they are legally required to give them assistance with like housing and jobs and things like that to help them reform into the community again for the next 2 years, which can sometimes lead to not very nice areas. But in general, people either pick themselves up or they get sent back to the reform house over and over and over again until they end up in one of those areas in which they all live together as antisocial people with like social workers on the ground who assist them in living and things like that. So it actually makes for, I think, safer environments. But I know that that's not going to be a popular opinion. But in general, the whole entire society is tiered, and you don't have to stick to your tier if you don't want to. You can't go above your tiered. Most things are tiered on salary instead of anything else. You're tiered on how much you earn. So if you are earning a tiered B salary and you want to live in tiered D accommodation, you can totally do that. It might not be as nice as you want, but it is what it is. However, even if you're living in tiered D accommodation, if you are earning a tier B salary, you still need to pay tier B prices in order to access services. For example, I'm a doctor. I was a doctor there. I'm a doctor here. The state covers the majority of cost for medicine. However, everybody who is not the lowest tiered, elderly, disabled, or a child has to pay a tuppence, a percentage of the treatment that they get. So, example, if you go in for a GP appointment and it costs me as a doctor $90 for you to come and see me, then if you're a tier C salaried person, then you might have to pay like 2% of the treatment that you're getting in order to come to the appointment. And I think that's just to make people more appreciative of the services that you get. And also, not all treatment is covered under the tiered system. There is, again, the open market as well. So, for example, if you want plastic surgery, you can get plastic surgery, but you're going to be paying 100% of the cost in order for you to get plastic surgery. I said before, I've made a video before how I used to do extreme body modifications. That was all paid for out of pocket. The government did not cover any of those costs. But yeah, that's how things worked. However, everybody, no matter if you were A-tiered salaried or you were D-tiered salary, everybody had the same safety net in place in which if you got diagnosed with cancer or whatever, if you had a lot of treatment, after a certain point, you stopped getting charged. You just went onto the free market once you met a threshold of how much you had paid for the year. And then at the end of every tax year, that would start again and you would have to pay again. But it was a good safety net. It kept things and people from going into too much debt or bankruptcy. And I wish that more places would implement that. It was incredibly useful. However, the other side note to that is that food, even though it was tiered on quality rather than price. So even if you were a tiered E person, which is an unemployed person, if you wanted a tiered A apple and you were ready to forego the other provisions that you were supposed to supply during the week, you could totally do that. There was nothing stopping you if you wanted to, just eat apples rather than save up for a new shawl or something. That was something that was totally in your capacity to do. However, in saying that, most tiered E people didn't do that because across the board, except for tiered A and tiered B people, everyone C and below every month would get a provisions box which was filled with food that they needed to survive. And that was provided by the state, as well as across the board from A to E tiered salaried people. You would receive bread, milk, and eggs supplied by the state on your doorstep every single week, which was also very beneficial because it meant that no matter where you were, no matter who you were, no matter how much money you were earning, no one was starving. No one was malnourished. Like, you had access to good, high quality food. And I think more countries should implement that because it was very, very healthy. As a doctor, I know that we certainly saw the benefits of that program, and I'm happy that we were able to run it. Dude, I am so sick. I have been up for 30 hours and I wasn't expecting to film something so theoretical today, but here we are. I was going to extend this out and also go into education, but I think this video is already going to be messy enough without me diving into that as well, so we might leave that for another day when I have been to bed within the last 2 days. I have not seen the sunrise 2 days in a row. So in the meantime, this is Casey signing off for the night. As always, stay weird out there, stay safe, and have a productive evening. I know that I won't be.